Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in just a few short days, the legal requirement for remaining COVID restrictions is removed. But this also includes measures which are not actually restrictions. And in this video, I want to focus in on the use of face masks and why the government felt unable to retain this major shield against infection, and when they know full well what the consequences are going to be, essentially. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the issue of face masks is maddeningly thorny. And I don't... We've known about this for hundreds of years. People wore face masks of a sort before we even had Louis Pasteur's germ theory. But apparently this is a particularly thorny issue now. Not as much as some people may think, because the majority of the public are not at all in favour of removing even the remaining restrictions when we are hurtling towards a third wave peak that in terms of number of infected people will even exceed all previous peaks. In fact, it's even likely to exceed all previous peaks added together. But the vast majority of the public do want to retain the rules on face masks. It is a majority of the public being polled want to keep the restrictions in place, but not an overwhelming majority. But when it comes to face masks, that is an overwhelming majority. And that is because it's not actually a restriction. It doesn't stop you doing anything. There is even not a sizable minority against it. It should be a no-brainer for the government to do what the Scottish and the Welsh governments have done, along with the Mayor of London, and said that the rules for face masks remain in place. Mark Drakeford, for example, the First Minister for Wales, has sent messages out every time that Boris Johnson has made an announcement that the Prime Minister's statements only apply to England. And although I've not seen them from Sadiq Khan or Nicola Sturgeon either, I imagine they're saying the same thing. The last thing, for example, that the Welsh government want are for people in Wales to think the new lack of rules applies to them as well. A face mask is a huge barrier to the spreading of infection. It's incredibly effective. It's not absolute proof, but this pandemic is a game of taking as many steps as practicable whilst also maintaining some sense of modern life. Wearing a face mask when distancing and ventilation are not great, in amongst, of course, others of multiple households, is a simple thing to do. It's an easy thing to do. You know, surgeons, surgery groups, in fact, have been doing this for hours at a time, very hard work under, not very pleasant conditions for years, decades. I've worn my face mask for hours at a time, all day at work. I don't like it, but I don't particularly like underpants, but I still wear them. And that's fine then, the COVIDiots say. You carry on wearing your face mask. And yes, of course I will. But what the munchkins keep failing to understand is that the face mask offers minimal protection to me. I wear it to protect others. It brings to mind a certain battle. I'm not going to mention it. I'm not doing this as a jibe. But there was a battle tactic that was used by one particular side. So one side had bayonets. The others had shields and whatever single-handed weapons they could find. Arrayed against a line of bayonets, the initial tactic was to use the shield to parry the bayonet out the way and then thrust in with whatever one-handed weapon you had or crack them over the head, whatever. That's how you dealt with the bayonets, So the side with the bayonets then developed a different tactic. Instead of aiming their weapon at their approaching foe, which wasn't going to work because they'll have their bayonet parried out the way, what they did instead was to strike at the one across them, next to them. Each bayonet-wielding soldier struck at the enemy who was about to attack their friend, leaving their own defence to the comrade to their left. Everyone acted, or maybe to the right, I don't know which way it went, but everyone acted to defend another, and they trusted their life to their fellows. That's what face masks are. The system is way less effective when only some people engage in it. My face mask is to protect others. Everyone else's face mask is to protect me and others. And even if I added further protections like, say, a face shield, which of course, remember, is no good for those who wear it thinking it helps others. It doesn't help others. The face shield is useless for others. That's why, In surgery, you'll see nurses, doctors wearing a face shield and a mask. The mask is to protect others. The face shield is to protect them. So that helps me partially. And it makes me much less likely that I'll become infected from someone else. But if people in general are not wearing masks, then the rate of infection soars. We end up with hospitals being overwhelmed at some point. And that might not be this summer, but it may be autumn or winter. We then end up with another lockdown. And that negatively impacts my life just like everyone else, including the ones who will moan the most about it when they are the ones who are responsible. And it doesn't affect my life as badly as for some, but I still don't like it. And what's worse is that I will have played my part to prevent this outcome. Even when I have someone over in here to play tabletop games, we're distanced. I use an air purifier. We still wear face masks. So why are the government not keeping this obvious measure in place? It doesn't stop people going out and about doing their thing. It's not a restriction. It is quite wrong to call it a restriction because it doesn't restrict you from doing anything. Well, I've seen this same information reported elsewhere, but the Financial Times did it best, I thought. It gave an example, and you can this leads into why this has happened. Staff at the Palace of Westminster, which is where the House of Commons is, where MPs mainly work. And the staff, of course, were wearing their face masks, as they should. They're legally obliged to. But how groups of MPs, Conservative MPs, would be wandering around not wearing a face mask. They'd be told by the staff, you're supposed to be wearing your face mask, and they'd chunter about it. The article pointed out that it's these same Tory MPs who made the law requiring the mask that they're not using themselves. One rule for us and all that. But therein lies the rub. That is the issue here. Tory MPs do not like the face masks. Who knows fundamentally why? It's just some mindless thing. They just instinctively think it's some blow against freedom, some restriction of civil liberties or something. I mean, how is it different to clothes? I have yet to see a Tory naturist MP demand to walk around Westminster in their birthday suit. How come one item, what is essentially clothing, is a blow against freedom and others are not? But this is why Johnson has dropped the requirement for masks. By all accounts, he would have kept them at least. In fact, it's not unlikely that he would have maintained restrictions for longer had he the support to do so. Remember, he did delay the removal of the restrictions last time as well. Parliamentary support is what was lacking. Remember, he has the public support to do this. But reports have suggested that a number of Conservative MPs were against any COVID measures, not just restrictions, any COVID measures being in place at all beyond the end of this week, and that they would not support them. Johnson would have needed Labour votes to get it through, and not just a few, he'd have needed a lot. There was even a suggestion that the strength of feeling amongst the Conservatives was so strong that actually Boris Johnson wouldn't have got the vote through Parliament at all, even with opposition votes. Now, I would find that incredibly hard to believe, because the scale of the rebellion would be immense to have stopped that. They have an 80 strong majority. I think it is still, we've had by-elections, but I think it still worked out about the same. Absolutely immense if that would be defeated with opposition votes. But if the vote would even be close, it would represent a level of damage, not unlike when Theresa May tried to ram her withdrawal agreement through Parliament just over 2 years ago. In fact, arguably it'd be worse, because on that occasion Labour weren't voting with her. And it would have the same effect. If Boris Johnson even tried to pass measures that the majority of Tory MPs were against, like the clear majority, that would threaten his position as leader. If he actually succeeded, if he rammed something through Parliament against the majority of his MPs' wishes, by working with the opposition, he'd be gone. They would actually trigger a vote of no confidence in him. The reason that Boris Johnson has dropped the requirement for face masks is that he didn't have the power to retain it and still be Prime Minister at the end of summer. And there are two things that we need to take away from this. The first, Boris Johnson is a weak leader. Unlike Donald Trump, who really did take over the Republican Party in America, Johnson still leads a party that will square up to him over certain issues. He's essentially still a front man. Yes, he gets to dictate an awful lot. The Conservative MPs put up with an awful lot that they disagree with in order to retain their electoral hopes, but they have their limits. Unfortunately, these red lines that they have are not really in our interests, which brings me to the second point. This is on the Conservatives as a whole. And we need to remember that. At least the parliamentary party. Boris Johnson bears responsibility for the confused and contradictory messages and the delayed actions throughout the pandemic so far. But the reason we are already seeing a steep rise in cases, which will increase still further a week or two after next week when the restrictions are dropped, and then the removal of measures helps the virus even more, that is down to the Conservative Parliamentary Party, all of them. Say all of them, all of the ones that have insisted that Boris Johnson drop the measures. You know, when it comes to those COVID measures, Boris Johnson is a very unfit leader. However, he is less insane than the majority of Tory MPs because it appears that he would be fine keeping those measures, but he's been forced to drop them by his MPs. What is coming is on all of them, not just the buffoon at the top. Over the last week, in terms of 7-day moving averages, the number of new cases per day has increased by 28%. It has been worse than that. Arguably, that is a slowing down, but that's still 28%. But remember, hospitalisations and deaths has a bit of a lag. The number of hospitalisations has increased by 47% in the last week. The number of deaths has increased by 43% in the last week. We have summer in our favour, in that many more gatherings will take place outside where ventilation is good than would be the case in autumn or winter. That's why the government think they can get away with this now, because it's better to have the peak in summer than in autumn. But against that, we already have a worrying level of growth, and we're about to remove measures that are keeping it in what you'd laughingly call check. And going back to that article in the Financial Times, they're suggesting that Johnson will have to U-turn on this madness. Now, public opinion is already against him. The scientific reality is against him. They quoted a government advisor as saying that masks only work if everyone does it. If even 70% continue to wear them, that sounds like a lot. If 70% carry on wearing them anyway, even though they don't have to, he said that means you lose most of the effectiveness. Now, that's not all of the effectiveness. That is not a call to say, well, if we don't get the vast majority wearing them, way more than 70%, there's no point in me wearing it at all because it does nothing. It's not that it does nothing. You know, I mean, I used them before they were mandated and I will continue to do so. But this is why they need mandating. It is not enough for the majority to carry on using them, if they even would. And given how effective their use is, just imagine what the numbers are going to look like for cases in 2 weeks' time, hospitalisations in 3 weeks' time, and then deaths in about 4 or 5 weeks' time. You know, I wonder if they're right and he will have to U-turn. I mean, Johnson got very used to U-turns last year, but given that the face mask mandate is being dropped due to Conservative MPs, the U-turn really has to come from them. And that likely means as a result of public pressure on their local MP, rather than the government specifically. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.